Hello everyone. Uh, Hope you are doing very well. Today we will cover AWS Cognito. Basically, we have already started AWS Cognito, but I think few things still left. So Varis will continue AWS Cognito.
Thank you. So in the last class, we saw how to use Cognito. We learned about it. We started it, and then I showed you how to make user pools. And in the first few steps, I showed you how to initiate or initialize Cognito in CDK, and then we also saw how to integrate it with the front end using UI components provided by Amplify. And then in the later steps, Sarjishan showed you how to create a hosted UI on your domain, and then how to integrate third party identity providers. I think he used Google. How to do, he taught you how to do that, and then he also taught you how to use that on your client side but using Amplify. So today we are again going to see another example of hosted UI, but this time we're not going to use any third party identity providers. We're going to use Cognito's own identity provider. And so this means that we will only be able to log in using Cognito's username and password. Okay. But the main difference in this step is that the front end does not have Amplify. There would be no Amplify on the front end. We would do everything manually. This would give you a better understanding of how things work on the back end of the Amplify, and it will give you more control on your client side. Okay. So let me share my screen. Mm, Just waiting for it to start. Okay. So let me open the step. So okay, we have done up till step 3, and now we have to move on to step 4. Let me zoom in. So most of the things that we learn in this step, we've already seen them in the previous steps. I'm going to try and do this quickly. So first of all, we're going to see the backend. So I'm going to copy this code. So I've already made a basic CDK project, and I've installed all the dependencies because it's just a waste of time. So I'm just going to paste this code over here, and I'm going to quickly explain it to you. Okay. So the first thing we have done over here is that we have created a user pool. Here, this entire thing is our user pool, and we've seen this a lot of times. So let me just quickly go through the parameters that we have defined over here. So the first thing is that self sign up is enabled. This means that users can sign up themselves on your website. You don't necessarily have to add them as an admin. And then we have defined some parameters for user verification email. The email that will be sent to the person after they have created the account. This email would send a code to them so that they can verify their account. They can verify their email. And then we have assigned our sign-in aliases. So this means that the users can sign in using email as well as a username. And then auto verification is true. This means that the code would automatically be sent to the email at the time of sign up. And this is the setting for username. Like, do we really care about the username, if it's case sensitive or not? Then these are some standard attributes uh, that the user would have to enter at the time of sign up. So you can see both of them are required, but full name is mutable. That means that the user can change it later if he wants to, if they want to. But the email is not mutable, so this means that it cannot be changed once it has been entered. Then we have also defined some account recovery settings. So as we have seen this before, that most of these parameters are optional, and it's totally up to your application how you want to define it. So this was our user pool, and we have done this a lot of times. Now the next thing is the client. Now you can see we have quite a big client over here. We have a lot of parameters in here. So first of all, let me compare it with the previous examples. Let me open up our step 2. So in this step, we actually did not use a hosted UI, but we used Amplify UI components on the client side. So let me show you how did our client look like in this example. So you need client whenever you want to connect your Cognito with the client side, or if you want to connect your Cognito with a hosted UI. Okay. This example, we were just connecting it with our client side using Amplify UI components. So that's why you can see that our client has no parameters at all. We have only referenced our user pool over here. So you can see we literally did not have any parameters here because we didn't need to. But in the next example, uh, which was discussed by Sir Zeeshan, in which we used a third-party identity provider. Um, I think we did have some parameters. Yeah, we do have some parameters in the client, but you can see most of the parameters were defined in this other object, that is user pool identity provider Google. So we have defined most of the parameters in this object, but we have still defined our callback URLs in the client. But now in this example, because we are not using a third-party identity provider, we have to define all the parameters inside our client, inside over here, because we do not have a separate object for our local identity provider. Okay. So the parameters that I would be defining would be similar to these, but inside here. Okay. So you can see the first parameter is the user pool. Here we have just referenced our user pool that we created above, and then generate a secret. Now we will use this on the client side. This is just a secret for this client. And then now this is the important bit. So basically, the Cognito actually uses OAuth 2, which is like, I think, a industry standard protocol for authorization. And and you can actually implement flows. Basically, there are three options to implement flows in OAuth 2. Let me show you all of them. Um, so here we're using authorization code grant, but there are two others as well. Let me actually show it to you. This is the one. Yeah. So you can see in OAuth 2.0 that Cognito uses, because that is the industry standard of protocol of authorization, we have three options: authorization code grant, uh, implicit grant, and client credentials grant. So you can use either one of them, but the recommended one is this one. As you can see over here, the authorization code grant is the preferred method for authorizing and users. And I also read somewhere that you should always use this method in Cognito unless and until there is like a solid reason to use another one, the other ones, because they're not recommended at all. So let's not go into too much detail about these flows, because they're not a part of Cognito. Cognito just uses them because it uses OAuth 2. And even I don't know much information about them. But if you want to know more about them, you can actually come to this link and have a look at it. But we will most probably always be using this one. So we're using authorization code grant as our OAuth flow. Okay. The next thing is the scope. So I think Sajishan must have explained this to you. It was also there in the previous step. Yeah, here we go. So scopes are basically the resources that are permitted to be used by the client. Okay. So this means that our client can have access to the OpenID scopes. And in the OpenID scope, you have the token IDs, the user token ID and the access token ID, if I'm not wrong. So it has all the token IDs, and the email scope has the email of the user. Okay, so we are saying that our client or our hosted UI would have access to the tokens and the email of the user. Okay, and then we are defining our callback and logout URLs. So uh, in the callback URL, both of them are arrays, so you can define more than one URLs. But in the callback URL, you usually define your login redirect URI, and in the logout URL, you define your logout redirect URI. Okay. And then we have created our domain, and we have given a prefix over here. And I think we also did that in the last example. So you see here, it's very similar to the last example. So uh, be mindful about this. That this is not your entire domain. This is just a prefix of your domain. The Cognito would add some text after it to build a domain. Okay. So this is not your complete domain. Okay. And then over here we are saying that, okay, the callback URL that we defined over here, use it as a sign-in redirect URI. Okay, and make sure that this URL is same. This is the same one that you defined over here. Okay, or one of the same ones that you defined over here, because it's an array. Okay, and this is basically our backend. Let me deploy it. Let's first check it out in the console. Um, So meanwhile that's happening, I'm actually going to make that diagram again that I made in the last class, because I might have to refer it when I'm explaining you the front end. So yep. So basically, this is your client side. This is your application. This is local host, and this is your hosted UI, your domain, and this has login sign up form on it, and you have a login button over here. So let me just repeat this, that when you click on the login button, it takes you to this. It takes you out of your application, and you're not in your application anymore. It takes you to your hosted domain where you enter your username and password, and there's an enter button over here. When you click this button, you get back to your application. And how does it know that what is the URL of your application? That is what we have defined in the callback URLs. Okay. So when you're going to log in, where is it? Sorry. So when you're going to log in, it's going to take you to this link. And in this case, I've made a dashboard page in my application. So it's going to take you to the dashboard page whenever you log in. Okay. And whenever you're going to log out, it's going to take you. It's going to take me to my. Sorry. It's going to take me to my index page. Okay. So how logout works is that you log out from your application itself, not from here, but it actually goes here and then comes back to the page that you define. Okay. Let me just remove these lines. Okay. Let's see if it's done. Okay, it's done. Let's go to the console. Mm-hmm. So the name of the user pool would be my user pool. Mm. Oh no, this is the other one. It's in US West. Yeah, here we go. So first of all, let's verify if everything's okay. So we can see we ask for full name and email. Let's check if that's right over here. Okay, email and name over here. And then the important thing over here is that so you can see all the callback URLs and the sign-out URLs that we entered in the CDK can be seen over here, are reflected over here. And this is the authorization. This is the OAuth flow that we chose, and these are the scopes that we allowed. Now, if you want to see your hosted UI, you can just click over here. Now, your domain name is this. So this was the prefix that you entered in the CDK, but Cognito adds this some extra text after it to make it a domain. But now you can see your sign-in page has some extra query parameters as well. So this is, I'm not sure if you can see this, but this is your domain. And if you want to see the login page, you have to add /login, and then you have to enter some parameters. So here we are entering client ID, and then we're entering response type, then we're entering scopes. So these are a few parameters that you have to enter to actually be able to see your sign-in page. If I just enter my domain, it's not going to open anything. You can see that. Okay. Now the idea is that on the client side, when I'm gonna hit the login button over here, it's gonna take me to my login page. The one that did this page, this URL, is gonna take me to this URL. And when I'm gonna enter my name, username, and password, I'm gonna click sign in. It's gonna take me back to my application or some other page of my application. Okay. So let's see. So we know that our domain is working right now. So let's see the client side. Okay, so I've already copied the code from the so there's nothing related to Amplify on our client side. But if you remember that in Amplify, we used to have a config file, aws-exports.js. We don't have this over here, but I made my own config file just to save all the tokens and all the secrets. So you can see I will have to enter my domain name over here, client ID over here, my login redirect URI, grant type, and all that stuff. That needs to be passed where? Over here. So that needs to be passed in the login URL. So you see, it's asking for client ID and everything, and all the other tokens. So that's why I've saved them over here. Okay. Now so let me just enter these first. So this is going to be my domain. My client ID. And login redirect URI, that's going to be the same. Yeah, we're going to come back to the dashboard page. And this remains authorization code because we use the grant authorization code OAuth flow. So you have to use this over here. And on the logout, we're going to come back to our index page. Okay. And here we have to enter our client secret. So it does not create a client secret by default. You actually have to define it in your stack. So you can see I must have defined it over here. Yeah. You have to write this line over here, generate secret true, because you would be needing it on the client side. So our config file is done. Now let's see what's on our index page. So let me also run this application.
Varesh, when you are done with this teaching today, please remember to destroy your.
Oh yeah, okay, sure.
थोड़ा स्लो चलो भाई. Varis, when you done this part, so please briefly explain again.
Okay. Am I going too fast again?
Yes, students. Students become a little jumpy. They need slow speed.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
You are too smart for them.
Okay, I'm going to revise everything once again after I'm done. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this is our index page. So you can see we have nothing on our index page, but just one button that says login. And when you click on that button, it's saying that redirect to this URL. And what is this URL? This URL is the same one that we saw over here, our login URL. Exactly the same URL. So whenever I click this button over here, it's going to take me to this URL. Okay. The URL may seem a bit different because I'm like importing all the tokens and configure and everything else from the configuration file, from the config file. So, but yeah, but the URL is same. We have our domain name first, and then /login, and then our client ID, response type. Yeah, you can verify it. It's the same. If you want to have a better look at the login URL, you can come to this link. This is given in the README of the repo, and you can see it asks for some parameters, and this is the link. This is going to be the link for your login page. So this is the domain, and then /login, and these are the parameters that you have to add. Okay. So yeah, so our index page is quite simple, and when I clicked on it, it took me to the same page over here. Okay. Now let's create an account. It's gonna send me a code. There seemed to be some kind of error. Okay. There has to be a problem in our config file, and yep, I think this is the problem. Let me just run this again, and we're gonna log in again. Just a login, sign in as virus. Okay, it's working now. So this is, as you can see, this is our dashboard page. Okay, so if I come back to the diagram, we clicked on the login page. We came here. I entered my username and my password, and then it took me back to the dashboard page. Okay, yeah, dashboard page. Okay. But the question is that how do we know that who logged in from here, right? And how do we know that? We know that by this token that was passed by the hosted UI to my application. So you see, the URL of my page is just this, but this is the extra code passed as a query parameter by the hosted UI to my application, and we're going to use this information, this code over here, to access the user tokens, the access tokens, and the user information. Okay. Now if I can show you the code of my dashboard page. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to retrieve this code from the URL. Okay, so for that I have actually used this location prop over here, and using this, if you do location.search, you can actually get this whole thing over here with the code, and then I have filtered out and then I've removed just this part, filtered out this part from this entire query parameter. Yeah, so this variable has just my code. Okay, nothing else. So we need to retrieve the code first. Now what do we need? So how do we get the user tokens and user information from this code? Now this was in the previous example, all of this was being controlled by Amplify, right? Because we were using Amplify libraries, but this time we're doing it on our own. So yeah, so when we get this code, we need to pass this code to token endpoint. Okay, and what is token endpoint? It is very similar to your login URL. Let me show you. So this is the URL for your token endpoint. Okay, so again, just like login URL, you have your domain over here. Then instead of /login, you have auth2/token, and because it's a post request, you have some headers in it, and then some parameters. Okay, so let me show you the headers and parameters. So yeah, I'm doing that in this function. Let me zoom out a bit. I cannot see it. Okay, so everything is being done in this function. So you can see this is the URL that I just showed you, your domain URL, and then and all the parameters and all the tokens and all the IDs are coming from my config file. Okay, But in the headers, you can see we have also to pass authorization header. So this one is like you can just copy paste it. It's just content type. But in the authorization header, you actually have to pass authorization data. And what is that data? Um, so that authorization data is this. So what you have to do is you actually have to concatenate your client ID with your client secret like this in a string. Yeah, like this. I've concatenated them with this thing in between. And then what you have to do is you actually have to encode them using base64 encode. Okay. So you have to pass that in your authorization header. Okay. And so I'm encoding my string with base64 base64 encoder using this function. This is a built-in function inside JavaScript. So you can just, if you just, so this code is basically concatenating these secrets and then encoding it. Okay. And we are passing that in our authorization header. Okay. And the rest is very simple. You just have to do a post request on this link, and you can see the code that we fetched from our URL is being passed over here as well as one of the parameters. Okay, so this is what we fetched from our URL, and we are passing it as one of the query parameters. Okay, yep, and rest of the parameters are client ID, redirect URI. You can actually see all the parameters from here, from this document. It lists all the parameters you need. Okay. Now this would actually the response of this would be your access tokens and your ID tokens. Okay. Now we still don't have the user information. What we care about is our user information. How did I get this name over here? How did I get this name? This is my username. How did I get it? So to get that, you actually need to pass this access token to another endpoint. The access token that we got from um, this this URL. Okay. We need to pass it to another endpoint. And what is that endpoint? Mm, that is user info endpoint. Okay. And again, it is very similar to our login URL. So it's just your domain name /auth2/user info, and you have to pass the access token in the authorization. And this will give you your user data. And that is how I'm getting my name, username over here. Okay. So let me show you where I did that. I actually did that in this function. You can see in the authorization header, I'm passing the access token that I got from the previous endpoint. Actually, I'm running this whole function inside this other function. So as soon as it gets the access token, it's running the fetch user details function. That is this one that is trying to fetch the user data from the access tokens. Okay. So in the authorization header, I'm passing access token, and the URL is the same one as I showed you. It's a small one. It doesn't have any query parameters, and that's it. And then I'm just setting my username in my state over here in the user state. And you can also see that I've done some extra stuff. I'm actually saving the token in my local storage. You don't have to worry about that. I just did that so that I can so that I don't have to like run the entire process if I hit the refresh button. So you don't worry about the local storage, but this is the main process that you need to worry about. Okay. So if I can go to the console log. Let me also console log the entire data. Mm, yeah, here it is. So you can see our sub. So we only gave access to this client to fetch our email, because if you remember in the where are the scopes? In the scopes, we said we want our and we also want this client to have access to our email. So it has got our email. Okay. And that's pretty much it. But I think there's one more thing left. That how do we log out? Okay. So you can also see we have a logout button, and I'm going to click on that. it takes me back to my index page, not back to the dashboard page, but the index page. So it came back here, and then it took me back to my index page. Okay. And how did I implement that? So if you can see inside this function, I'm saying that whenever I hit the log, so it's this function is being called over here on the on click of this button. We only have one button. So what this function is doing is that it's saying that um, just redirect to this URL, that is your logout URL. And where did I get that from? Again, from the same documentation. You can see, you can actually come over here on the logout endpoint, and this is your logout URL. Again, you have your domain / logout instead of login, you have a logout, and you have some query parameters. And that is what I've done. So this is a domain / logout, and your client ID and some other parameters, logout URI. Okay. So yeah. So I think I've covered everything. Now let me just quickly summarize it, revise it again, because I've been going too fast. So let me start again with the backend. So basically, the idea of this step is to use Cognito's own identity provider.
Varis, just me summarize. Let's see. Let me
Okay.
start from zero. What we are trying to do is use AWS to sign up and sign in. In the last class, we had covered. Varis, what did we cover
So in
so
the
far in
last
the
class,
last
we
class?
first saw how to initialize Cognito on these backend CDK, and then we saw how to use that on the client side using simple Amplify UI components. And then Zeeshan taught us how to make a hosted UI that I just showed you. And he also showed you how to use that with third-party identity providers and how to use that on the client side using Amplify.
When you mean hosted website, you mean the login and sign up page and sign in page is your own page in your own domain.
Yep.
You do not forward it to any place else.
Yep.
Now that was we covered in the last class. And which steps did we cover in the last class, which was of Cognito? If you can go to the repository.
Yep. So in the last class, we covered step 0, 1, 2, and 3.
Now we are trying to cover Cognito example 4 and 5.
Yep.
And in these examples, what is the other way of doing this? Of not hosting it, but doing what?
No, we are still hosting it, but in the last example, we showed how you can host it and use a third-party identity provider. But this time, I'm showing you how to not use a third-party identity provider and just use Cognito's own identity provider. Like you would only be able to log in and sign up using Cognito's or credentials. Okay.
Okay.
But the main difference is that on the client side, in this example, we are not using Amplify. In all the previous examples, we were using Amplify, but in this example, we are doing everything manually.
Mm-hmm. So
Yep.
therefore, the whole point is now let's revise the whole thing from the your code from the beginning for this example.
Okay. So this is the back end. So first of all, we just created a user pool, and
I think, Varis, your voice is stuck. You will have to restart your app. There's some glitch in your network.
using Amplify libraries, or if you want to connect it with your hosted UI. Okay.
Varis, there was some glitch in the network. We'll have to repeat it because the
Okay.
video got stuck.
Oh, okay. So the first thing that we've done is we have created a user pool that we need, because obviously, because without creating a user pool, you cannot do anything. That is where all your users are managed and stored. So first of all, we have created a user pool, and these are different parameters that we have defined for it. And after that, we have created a client. Okay. Now you
I think
Yes,
there is
I
a
think there
problem
is some
again
problem
on the
with the computer.
voice thing. I think, Varish, you will have to shut down your and restart your computer, because that's in software that is the only solution.
Yeah.
Actually, hardware also that's the only solution. Varish, you have to shut down your computer and restart.
StreamYard is also too heavy, so maybe there is some problem due to this software. Let me
Mhm.
explain basically the
Of
AWS
course, I can
Cognito.
hear you.
Sir, can you hear me?
Just you have to increase your voice. I
Yes.
think the mic is yes, yeah,
Can you hear me now?
yeah, it is better.
Is it better now? Perfect. Basically, AWS Cognito. What is AWS Cognito? Whenever we need to use the authentication service, whenever we need to authenticate the user, whatever we have the application like on React or on Google, on Angular or on Gatsby, we need in any application there is the authentication service for sign in or sign up. So AWS basically provide us this service, that is AWS Cognito. We don't need to create custom methods, we don't need to create custom tokens. AWS provides us this service. This is completely scalable. This is completely secure. So, what Varis is trying to explain in this today's class, he is basically sign in and sign up methods. He is showing us using AWS Cognito user pool. So, I think Varis is with us right now. He is again stuck.
You can continue, Daniel.
Yeah, sure. So AWS Cognito is very rich service. They provide us multiple features like sign in, sign up using user pool. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sir. Actually, I was not prepared, but let me open my account. A lot of account which client has already given us. This is my personal account. Let me open it and going on the Cognito. Uh, this is
Daniel,
basically yes, sir.
currently, how many clients do you have who you are working for AWS?
Sir, currently I have three clients,
Mm-hmm.
and I started AWS in 2018 January. In
Mm-hmm.
January 2018,
Mm-hmm.
uh, so till now I'm working, and this is one of the best cloud provider, Amazon. Then in 2019, I did under your supervision certification of AWS, Alhamdulillah, and
Mm-hmm.
now focusing another certification of AWS. So
Mm-hmm.
lots of services of AWS, lots of services. Just we need to understand how AWS works, because
Mm-hmm.
here we are, but we cannot teach everything, because if you write any wrong mistake on AWS on Google, it should be a service of AWS. There is more than 150 services of AWS. So, and the best stack. We don't need to worry about scalability. We don't need to worry about servers because you believe me. Right now, I have an application that is flight application, flight search applications, air flights, and trillion and million data is revolving in a second.
Mm-hmm.
What we are using, because the server we need the heavy servers for that application, we are using Lambda functions.
Mm-hmm.
We are using AWS Lambda. That is
Mm-hmm.
highly scalable. That is highly scalable.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Varis is again with us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Varis, how are you? Now it's better.
Yeah, I think that's better.
Okay, let's continue. Let's continue. Actually, I just I'm just showing here to the users, to the students. The users manage pools and manage user pools, identity, that all type of things. Uh, this one I can open it. So basically, right now, Varis is showing the user pool which he is created using AWS SDK. So yes, Varis, please continue.
Okay, sure. Let me share my screen. Hmm. Okay, so let me just start from the beginning. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to initialize a user pool, create a user pool, and here, that's what we've done over here. And in that, we have defined some parameters. So most of these are optional, um, but in here we have defined like self sign up is enabled. That means that people can sign up themselves. And we have some user verification settings, sign in aliases that the person can sign in using their email as well as username. And then auto verification is true. This means that the code would be sent automatically to the user when they sign up. And we are also asking for some standard attributes at the time of sign up. And then we have defined some auto recovery settings. So this is your user pool. Okay? We have done this in all these steps before. Now the interesting part over here is the client. Uh, Now because we're using Cognito's own identity provider, so all these settings for the hosted UI and the identity provider would be done in the client. Okay, and you always need a client whenever you want to connect your application with the client side, with the front end, or with the hosted UI. Okay, so in the client we have just there are a few parameters. The first parameter is the user pool, and we have referenced our user pool over here. Okay, the second parameter is to generate secret, whether we want to generate a secret or not. And we saw on the front side, from on the client side, that we do need a secret because we have to pass it in the different endpoints. And then we have defined the OAuth flow that we need. So as I told you before, that Cognito uses OAuth 2.0, which is like an industry standard protocol for authorization. So we're just saying that we want to use authorization code grant inside the OAuth 2, okay, OAuth 2.0, okay. And this is the recommended method. This is the recommended flow. So you would most probably always be using this. You don't have to know about the other flows, okay. And then we have defined some scopes. So in scopes, we actually define that what is permitted for the client to access, okay, from the Cognito server. So here we are saying that okay, the client or the hosted UI, that URL that has the login and sign up form, that can access your OpenID scope. In the OpenID scope, you have your token ID, your access token ID, user token ID, and I think refresh token ID. And in the email scope, you have your user's email. So we are saying that our that URL that has login and sign up page, it can have access, or this client or that page is the same thing. They can access to your email and your tokens. Okay, and then we have defined some callback URLs, and this is how your that page, that hosted UI knows that where do you want to redirect after logging in or logging out. Okay, so yeah, so like if you sign in from this page, where do you want to go? This is what. So this is defined in the callback URLs. Okay, and same goes for the logout. Okay, so this was our client, and then we have written some. Then we have defined our domain. Now be mindful that this is just the prefix of your domain. This is not your entire domain. Okay, your entire domain would look something like this. So this is the prefix that we added in the CDK. Okay, but this is your entire domain. The rest of the stuff is added by Cognito itself. Okay, and the login page that I showed you is hosted on this domain. But to get this login page, you have to write /login, and then you have to enter some query parameters. Okay, if you just want to quickly access your login page, you can actually just go to your app client settings, and you can click over here, launch hosted UI, and this will take you to your login page. Okay, And after defining our domain, we have defined our sign-in URI. So we're saying that the callback URL that I define in my client, this one, has to be my sign-in redirect URI. What this means is that whenever I sign in from here, it has to take me to this URL that I'm defining over here. Okay, and make sure that the URL that you're defining over here has to be present in your callback URLs array. Okay, and that's it for the backend. And if you deploy it, you can actually go to the user pools and you can see all the settings over here. So you can see all the callback URLs and the sign out URLs and the OAuth flow settings that I did. Okay, and you can see your hosted UI by clicking this link. Okay, and it would be on your hosted UI. This is the prefix that I gave in the CDK, and the rest is added by the Cognito itself. Okay, so we're going to use this URL, this login page on our client side now. Okay, so in the last step, we saw how to use it on the client side using Amplify, but this time I'm going to show you how to do it manually without using any library. So on the client side, we do not have Amplify, so everything you have to do everything manually. So
Here we have a config
yeah,
to connect with AWS account.
sorry.
No, go ahead, go ahead. Basically, I just explaining. This is basically the config of AWS, how to connect with client.
Okay, right, yeah. So basically, I've defined a config file that has all our tokens and all our secret IDs and tokens, and I will be using all these values in my pages. Okay, you can also write them directly over here, but I just like to put them in a separate file. Okay, so the domain URL. So all these values would come from your console. So your domain URL would come from here in the domain name. You just copy this and paste over here. Your client ID. Sorry. Your client ID would come from here. You just copy this and paste it over here. And your login redirect URI would come from your backend that you defined over here. Okay. You can also view it in the console, in the app client settings. Okay. And yeah. And same goes for the other parameters. You can just get them from the console. Okay. Now we have two pages in our application. Let me just run this. We have two pages in our application. The first one is the index page that just has one button. And what does that button do? When you click that button, it takes you to this page. It just takes you, redirects you to this link. That is your login page. And where did you get this link from? You can easily get it from here. You can easily just click over here, and I'm just literally just redirecting to this page when I click on the login button. Okay. Now this URL may seem weird to you because I'm like importing values from my config file, but the URL is the same. So basically, if you want to look at this URL in more detail, you can actually go to this page. The link to this page has been given in the repository. So you can come over here and click on the login endpoint, and it will show you all the parameters that you need to pass in here. Okay. So first of all, you have to enter your domain /login and then the query parameters. Okay. The query parameters are very simple. Like they're like client ID, redirect URI, everything that you have defined before, or you can find from the console. Okay. So this is my application. This is my index page that I just told you about. Okay. Now, when I click on this login page, I should come back to this page, right? Because that's what I'm doing over here. On the click of this button, it should redirect to this link. And if I click on here, it's going to take me back to this page, right? Now, if I enter my username and password, it takes me to the dashboard page. That is the other page that I made on my application, okay? Now, how did it know that it had to come back to dashboard page? Because in the config file, we define our login redirect URI to be dashboard. So this means that whenever you click on the login button on the sign-in page, it would always redirect to this page, okay? And we have also defined this in our backend, okay? So this is what login redirect URI means, that whenever you click on the login button, it should redirect you to this link, okay? So you can see it did not only redirect me to this link, but it also sent some information with it. You can see this, it sent us a special code, and we will use this code to figure out that who just logged in from that hosted UI, okay? So this was being done automatically by Amplify, but in this case, we're doing it manually, okay? So the first thing you need to do is you need to retrieve this code from the URL, okay? And to do that, you can actually use the location parameter, location prop in React. I mean, I think everyone knows how to use this. And then if I can just show you what this looks like. Yep. So it actually gives you a good breakdown of your URL. You can see it gives you a host name, that is this, and href, that is your entire URL. So what I've done is I've actually taken this thing, location.search, this thing over here. But the problem with this thing is that this also has this code, question mark code equals to in it. So then I filtered it out using this substring. Okay, just simple as that. So all I've done is retrieve this code back from the URL. Okay. Now what do we need to do with this code? We need to do something with this code to get back the user information. Okay. Now to do that, you actually have to pass this code to an endpoint, to a token endpoint. Okay. This token endpoint, and what this will do is this will return us the access token and the user ID token. Okay. And what is this endpoint? It is very similar to the login endpoint. It's very similar to this, but instead of login, it would have auth/token. Okay, let me show you. Yeah, here we go. So your domain/auth/token, and then you have to pass, because this is a post request, you have to send some headers. These are two headers, and these are the request parameters. Request parameters are just like these that you're passing over here. Okay. So how I have done this in the example, I've actually made a function, and in that function, okay. So in the headers, you also have to pass an authorization header, and in that authorization header, now in that authorization header, you actually have to pass. You have to pass your client ID and secret ID concatenated together, joined together, and encoded using base64 encoder. Okay. So that's what you have to pass. I mean, that's what they have given you in the documentation. So what I've done is I've actually taken my client ID, user pool client ID, user pool client ID and user pool client secret, concatenated them in a string, and then encoded them using um, base64 encoder. Okay, and this is the function that is given to us by JavaScript that does that, that does the encoding. Okay, and I'm passing that in the authorization header. Okay, this is the, I think this is the confusing part, and the rest is you just have to then run a post request on this URL, and it is very similar to your login URL, your domain slash, instead of login, it's auth2/token, and then some query parameters. And you can see that the code that we retrieved from the URL, we're also passing it to this to this endpoint. Okay. Now, what this endpoint will return us, it would be our access token and ID token. Okay, so you can see it's returning us the access token. Okay, but we don't really care about the access token right now. On the client side, we want the information about the user, right? We want the username, all the details, the email. Okay, now to get that, we need to run another endpoint, and that is this user info endpoint. And what do we need to pass in this? We need to pass the access token that we got from the token endpoint. Okay, and this one is quite simple. We don't have to pass any query parameters in here. All we need to pass is this header, this authorization header with access token. That's all we have to do. So I have done this in another function that I'm running over here in the previous function, but I'm just passing the access token to it because it has to pass that access token in the authorization header. Okay, and now this endpoint will give us the user information, everything, the username, the email, and all the other details. Okay, and that's it, and that's what I'm actually showing it over here. So this is what is being returned by the user info endpoint. Okay, so what we did, first of all, we got a code in the URL. We got this code in the URL. We took that code, we passed it through token endpoint. The token endpoint gave us the user ID token and access token, and then we passed the access token from this token endpoint to user info endpoint, which gave us this user information, and that is what is being displayed over here. Okay, and that's it. Yeah, and then yeah, for the logout, you have another endpoint that is this one. It's again very similar to the login URL, very similar to this one, but instead of login, it's going to be logout, and some you have to pass some query parameters like client ID and logout URI. Okay, let me show you. So this is the URI, very similar to login one. The parameters are slightly different. Okay, and what I'm saying is that whenever you click this logout button over here on my website, if you click this logout button, just go to this link, this logout URI. Okay, just run this. So when I'm clicking, so on click, the on click function of this button is actually running this function that is redirecting us back to the index page because we're logging out. Okay, yep. So should I move on to the next step?
No, I think we don't have enough time to start using doing IAM user. I think we'll start doing it. Have we completed Cognito? Do you want to add anything to Cognito?
No, there's one step left, but for that, I think we need to explain IAM users first.
Okay.
Yep.
Therefore, what we are going to do is complete the class today, right now, and finish the class right now, and move over to the next step, IAM user, in the next class, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
No,
so what I'm saying is that you need to the last step of Cognito to understand that you actually need to understand IAM users. So first,
I understand. Yes.
Yeah,
So next class we will start with the IAM user, then come back to this step.
Okay, right. Okay.
So and this is your first completely independent class, so therefore you might be a little nervous also.
Yeah.
This goes with the training, and this goes with the territory, and soon other students will also start joining you to teach and to help others, God willing. And okay, everybody, bye. See you in the next class. Bye.
Bye.